All right, we'll get started here in just a moment. Welcome to this afternoon's Planning Commission meeting. Before we get started, a little rundown on how we'll handle things today. We've got 3 cases on our agenda. The staff will present each case one by one to us. We'll have an opportunity to ask them questions before the applicant is invited up to present any additional details they may have. Then we will open up the public hearing for each case. You'll have your opportunity to come forward and speak on that specific case. We do ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less in the interest of time. After that, we'll invite the applicant back up if there are questions raised that they would like to address. Then we will have a discussion before making our decision. One note about resolutions, we do have draft resolutions written, both for approval and denial, but that's just to kind of guide us in our finding of facts and in making good resolutions. I think that's it. Then we'll just need to handle any conflicts of interest or potential conflicts of interest today, Commissioners. Hearing none, we can get started with our first case at 1340 Monroe Ave Northwest. And Laura will walk us through this.
So our first case is at 1340 Monroe Northwest. This is in the TNTCC Zone District. The request before you today is to allow for additional density, greater density than what the zoning ordinance would typically allow. The project site is located east of Monroe, just alongside the river here, between Monroe and Taylor, just south of Caledonia Street. The site is the former location of the display pack factory, and it is currently vacant. Display Pack no longer occupies that site. Like I said, it's in the TNTCC Zone District. The site is improved with several buildings that are kind of built and connected on the site and a gravel parking lot. The buildings are not really in a state that could be used or reused. So the proposal for this site is a new mixed-use development. So the proposal is for 2 large mixed-use residential buildings, 4-story, and in between the buildings will be a multi-level parking structure for the use of the residents and patrons of the businesses. To facilitate the development, the site, for the financing on the site, the parcel will need to be split into 2 separate parcels. The request and the aspect of the plans can be built by right should the parcel remain one parcel, but because it's being split into 2 for the financing, one parcel will be phase 1, the second parcel will be phase 2. The second parcel is slightly smaller, and although the building will mirror the same building on the first parcel, because it's smaller, it has more density than the size of the parcel can support. So that's why this case is before you today, for the optional plan review to allow an increased density on the site. The master plan, the 2002 master plan, identifies this area as mixed-use riverfront, and it is directly located adjacent to a mixed-use village center. To the north is a Clearwater Place event venue. And then on the other sides, the east, the south, and the west, there are offices and light industrial, and there is a steel treating company directly to the south at the portion of the site that is adjacent to this site. Phase 1 is as you can see here, is the northern parcel. That will be the first parcel that will be developed. It will include, it's about a little over 4.5 acres. It'll have a 4-story mixed-use building with 260 residential units, and the parking deck planned is a 3-level parking deck. Parcel number 2 is the second phase, and this is the parcel that is up for you for consideration for the density. It's 2.7 acres in area, and the building is the 260 residential unit 4-story building. As part of the parking deck will be completed also as phase 2. The 2 parcels will be tied together through shared parking agreements, utility easements, and even though they will be separate parcels, they will forever be tied together through these agreements and will operate as a single parcel. The split is purely to facilitate the development and the financing for the development. So the density requirement in the TN-TCC zone district is 750 square feet per unit. We measure that using half of the public right-of-way and the area of the parcels. As I've stated, the number of units proposed and the 2 parcels together, that area will support the proposed density on the project as a whole. For phase 1, the area of that parcel for the density calculation is approximately 5.6 acres. That can support 327 dwelling units, and there are 250 dwelling units proposed towards the density requirement. Throughout the project, 20 of the total number of units will be micro units, and the zoning ordinance does not include micro units in the density count. So that's why it's 250 instead of 260. So that is well within the maximum density allowed for the site. Phase 2, the parcel is about 3.1 acres. It is smaller, and it can support 179 dwelling units. Again, 250 units are proposed, which is why this request is put before you today. There are slides included in the packet and on the screen that show the layout of the site. Just really for general interest, the request before you today is limited to allowing a greater density, but it is nice to see the site as a whole. The other elements of the site that are proposed do meet the ordinance requirements and can be built by right. There's a large amount of green space proposed to exceed the requirements, and so I've included these just for general interest. The applicant has met with the Creston Neighborhood Association, and the association has submitted a letter of support with a hope for this project that it will bring revitalization to the area, and they are in support of it. So today, we ask the Planning Commission to consider the optional plan review request to approve additional density on parcel 2, phase 2 of this project, more than the ordinance would normally allow. Does the Planning Commission have any questions for me?
All right, thanks, Laura. Any questions, commissioners? All right, thank you. I'll invite the applicant up if there are other details you'd like to share with us.
Hi, my name's Don Shoemaker with Franklin Partners. The ownership of this is Franklin Monroe North LLC. I just want to thank you for your time. We hire the best architect in town, Tom Tooley here, and so we're really happy with the design and the layout. And we bought this property, I think about 8 years ago from Display Pack, And they said, would you buy it and give us time to move out because we don't know when we're going to be able to move out. And we bought it thinking it's just really good real estate. And we tried for a long time to convert it to an office building. Your major healthcare provider, we chased for a long time before they decided to build new. And we've tried many different attempts on it. We were twice agreed to sell it to another local developer who was unable to get his financing. And then we started thinking about it amongst ourselves and talked to the city about the need for residential units and said, boy, great site, neat property. Let's get the right team together to do it ourselves. We tried very hard to reutilize the building. It pains me as someone who renovates buildings for a living that we couldn't, but it was just too wide. The cost was 50% higher to reuse the building versus building brand new. In Tom's layout, you can see what's really neat is the whole center of the building is an amenity section with pool, and now they're pickleball courts, but they figured out how to make them so they're not too loud, and heat lamps and grills, and a really highly amenitized project for the market. So we're really excited about it. Tom can answer any specific questions, but appreciate everybody's time.
Good afternoon, Tom Tooley, Ghaffari Associates. I just wanted to, we referenced mixed use, and one of the things I just wanted to let you know that Monroe Ave in both buildings on the first floor is active use. It has our club room, our lounge space. We've got a small co-working space, and we are setting aside 2,500 square feet for retail as well in each building as of today. So I just wanted to do that. The other thing that on the financing, because the project is so big, that's why it's being split. But it's also HUD financing. And with HUD comes some extra requirements. For instance, we're going to have to put in, for environmental reasons, an underslab vapor containment capture system. So that'll be part of it. We also have to go with a National Green Building certification. So we have a sustainability consultant on staff, which happens to be right here in our town, Catalyst Partners, that'll be assisting us through that. So I just wanted to let you know with that financing package, we get a better building. So I'm here to help, answer questions, anything you have.
One question in terms of phasing, how quickly will Phase 2 happen after Phase 1, do you anticipate?
We don't have that answer today right now. I mean, the goal is finish the one, go right into the other one, but we just don't have the date. We have met with design team, and we are aware that, depending on that timing, we're going to have to treat that south facade of that parking deck because in Phase 1, we're essentially building the first 2 bays. And the third bay would be in Phase 2. Okay? So if that Phase 2 doesn't come up quick enough, then we're going to put a treatment on there, hopefully something that's relocatable when we do the second phase.
The plan, if things go the way we hope they do, is to start construction on the second phase as soon as the first phase is done. You don't want to cannibalize your leasing either and have people move out of one into the other. So there's a little timing on that, but we think there's a lot of demand for it.
Don, can you talk into the microphone?
Yeah, we think there's a lot of demand and believe the second phase will happen right as the first phase is being completed. That's our plan. Economies changes, interest rates change. That's our plan. And I will say what Tom mentioned, when we take down the existing building in Phase 1, we're not going to leave a dirt lot there. We're considerate to our neighbors. We know Mike DeVries well. We know the Hanson Bulk people well. Everybody's pretty excited about the development. It helps the whole neighborhood. So our plan is, as we take down the building and build Phase 1, is to clean that site so it'll look presentable in the area.
Yeah, and the other thing just on timing is we don't plan to take the building down until sometime during the winter. That helps with dust control and that kind of stuff. And then we're being told planning on 20 to 24 months of construction, just for a time frame.
I have a question. So at our last Planning Commission meeting, Planning Commission made some recommendations to City Commission regarding modifications to the zoning ordinance to allow 5 stories by right in the TCC zone district. They won't consider that until July 11th, but I just wanted to, I understand that you were part of those, or are aware of those discussions, but I just wanted to make sure that you are on purpose not asking for 5 stories.
I'm sorry.
So your proposal is for 4 stories.
Yes.
If City Commission approves the recommendations from Planning Commission, allowing 5 stories by right in the TCC, you could have 5 stories. I just want to make sure that that's not what you want.
No, we do not.
Great.
Yeah, and I just kind of fill you in originally, we talked about 4/1, which is 4 stories of, residential over a podium. And we originally designed that this way. And then we kind of went back through the process and we were able to bring that down. And the benefit of that was we got to bring the building right to the street level versus having a garage elevation. Thank you.
Any other questions, commissioners? All right, I'll have you take a seat. I'll open up the public hearing. If you're here today about this case at 1340 Monroe Ave Northwest, I invite you to come forward, state your name, and share your brief thoughts with us. All right, seeing no one jump up, maybe?
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Martin Balk, and I'm with the Hanson Balk Steel Treating Company. We are just to the south of the proposed project, and I guess just as a neighbor here, we saw some interest in being here. We've had a chance to talk to Don. They've been very transparent with their plans with us going forward, which we really appreciate. And we're also on board with the Creston Neighborhood Association and definitely in favor of this type of development because we can see it coming all around us. So, we've been in business since 1955. We've been at this location since 1980. And so I've been there most of those years. I came closer to 1990, but I remember when my folks moved the business here, there wasn't a lot going on in the area. So it's been kind of cool to see this change. And with what's being proposed today, I guess we look at, what does this look like for our business? We've been there 40-some years. We've looked at our options. We stay, we go, we try to find another location. But moving is not easy. But I think the part about staying that worries us a little bit is we want to be a good neighbor. We've tried to be a good neighbor for those 40-some years that we've been there. And I think the concerns that come up for us, I think it was mentioned light industrial. I would consider our operation heavy industrial. We have dozens of heat treating furnaces, quench pits. We make a lot of noise. We produce a little smoke at times. We're 24 hours, 5 days a week, 10 hours on Saturday, 10 or 12 hours on Sunday as well. And we have customers coming and going. We have suppliers coming and going, vendors delivering gases, any processing gases that we might need. And I guess, until we find an opportunity to move, we're just afraid that, this thing starts to roll and we're happy that it's there. But all of a sudden, people are complaining like, hey, what's with these trucks coming in the middle of the night? There's a little smoke coming out of the roof, even though we're running through filters and whatnot. And it's going to be loud. It's going to be loud. And so I imagine if this building were here first, and then we tried to come along and put a heat treat next to it, might be a tough sell. I get that. But in the event we can't find another location, I'm concerned that we're not going to be welcome where we're at. So again, Don has been amazing. Okay, they've been so good keeping us up to date what's been going on. I think since day one when they bought the building, we've talked about doing things together. He's told us, here's what's going on. But from day one when we heard this could be residential, we thought, is this going to be a problem for us? So I guess I want to stand here today, offer my support for the project, but also express our concerns that we're going to do our best to be an outstanding neighbor to this project.
Right. Thank you.
But we need to run our business as well.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Anyone else on this case? All right, I'll close the public hearing. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to the discussion or if there's other questions for the applicant from the commission.
Do you want to address any kind of sound stuff?
I do. I appreciate Marty's comments, and we like to be considerate of our neighbors. I see the projects that go down on Market Street in a very industrial neighborhood and fill with residential without the center core amenities here. I think it's the start of the gentrification of the neighborhood. We're going to need to work together. We're going to need to make sure our residents are educated on what goes on there. They're going to know that moving in. It's not going to be a surprise. So I think it's just being good neighbors and working together. We're fully aware, but this is how gentrification to the neighborhood starts. It's got to start somewhere. It never happens. So I appreciate Marty's comments. We will continue to communicate with our neighbors and work together and find ways to make this a happy project for everybody. Any questions? No.
I have one more question of staff. Is the river walkway across from there completed in that section or not? Just, we talk about riverfront and there's businesses across the street, so I didn't know if there's access to the river at all. It's in process?
It's not complete. I believe we were awarded the grant from the state, and I think we are in the design development phase, as well as the acquisition of any necessary construction easements. I want to say it was late 2024 for completion. I'm looking at some colleagues nodding, yep, late 2024 when we're looking for completion of that.
Great, thank you.
All right, then discussion on this. Any concerns about the density here?
I think it's a good transition use as we see Monroe expanding. We've seen North Monroe, south of Leonard, add a lot of housing, and with what we've been told about the need for housing, this looks like a good way to repurpose a site that's been vacant for, 8-9 years into housing. And I am a little worried about the compatibility of industry next to it, but hopefully urban dwellers are a little aware of noise factors going on and will be acceptable of that because the other amenities will be very likable.
Yeah, I'm not concerned about the density here either. I mean, as a whole, it could be done by right, so this seems completely appropriate given the constraints on the financing of the project. And in terms of the compatibility with industrial, I think that as we've seen in kind of other developments that have come here, while not exactly the same, there's an understanding that industrial is an important use in our city, and we don't want to lose a bunch of our industrial land in the city, and so that comes with it, right? And just as the applicant said, residents are going to be made aware of what's going on, and if the industrial use is operating within compliance of the ordinance, then that's it, right? So, yeah, I'm completely in support and happy to make a motion unless there's more discussion. Yeah.
I'm in support as well. I'm wondering, Kristen, if you can remind us why do we do a OPR and what are options were considered and why was this the best one in the interest of education?
Yes, thank you. So the optional plan review gives the Planning Commission the ability to look at a project through a planning lens, different than what a Board of Zoning Appeals may look at if they were to consider a use variance, for example. And so it's intended to be a tool for you to think, I want to say a little bit more broadly or a little bit more holistically, where there's maybe a unique set of challenges, innovative design, special issues, public-private matters. So it gives you the flexibility to specifically look at site building and placement standards and consider whether modifications in light of special issues, for example, is appropriate. So it's intended to be another tool in your toolbox to facilitate developments that are otherwise compliant with the ordinance, consistent with our long-range vision or even our short-range vision plans. There were other tools certainly that are could be available. I mentioned through the Board of Zoning Appeals, there is a dimensional variance. That has a very specific set of standards where one must demonstrate a practical difficulty. And in my conversations or my understanding of this project, I really don't think that that exists here. The financing challenges that are created doesn't speak to the land use consideration. The Board of Zoning Appeals is in a very narrow box when they have to consider those standards and projects against those standards. Certainly another tool could be a plan redevelopment district. That has a very different process, a much more lengthy process. I didn't think that that was necessary considering the project, at least as initially presented and as otherwise conceived, does comply with the ordinance. And so it didn't feel like it fit the applicability requirements of the planned redevelopment as cleanly. Oh shoot, I lost my train of thought. And so when we have this tool of the optional plan review, it felt like it allowed for the project to be considered through a similar lens as a PRD, but keep it within the scope of authority of the Planning Commission. There's also a lot of other, Laura mentioned, agreements that effectively tie these properties together through whether it's cross-access, shared parking, shared utility agreements. So effectively, these properties cannot be independent. They may be independently owned, independent finance, but they're not operating independently of each other like other properties in the city. And so again, it felt like there was enough connectivity between these two parcels that make it one development that I arrived at the OPR as I thought a reasonable tool for your consideration.
All right, anyone else? All right, here we go. Now therefore be it resolved that the Planning Commission approves the optional plan review request of Franklin North Monroe LLC, Ray Warner, to modify the density requirement in the TNTCC Traditional Neighborhood Transitional City Center Zone District to facilitate the phased construction of a 520-unit, two-building mixed-use development with a shared parking structure at 1340 Monroe Avenue Northwest for the following reasons. The project will meet the site plan review standards of Section 5.12.8.e because the site will be developed so as not to impede the normal and orderly development or improvement of surrounding property for permitted uses. The development will be designed to meet all other requirements of the zoning ordinance. The project will be consistent with the purpose and intent of the master plan and zoning ordinance, including the zone district, because the project will support the intent of the riverfront area of the master plan with the redevelopment of an underutilized property that will provide necessary high-density residential associated parking and a mix of other uses. The project will be compatible, harmonious, and appropriate with the character and uses of the neighborhood, adjacent properties, and the natural environment, because this development will support the placemaking elements of the TNTCC zone district, specifically a mixed-use environment. The project will not have adverse effects on the neighborhood because on-site vehicle parking will be provided within a parking structure for residents and visitors, and the building and parking structure setbacks will allow for additional green space, urban open space, and a dog park for residential use. The project will not be detrimental, hazardous, or disturbing to existing or future uses or to the public welfare by reason of excessive traffic, noise, or visual clutter, because the intensity of the use is appropriate to its surroundings with access to multiple streets and public transportation. The permitted and planned uses are allowed within the TCC district and will not include any use which is detrimental. The project will not adversely affect the walkability of the neighborhood, impair pedestrian circulation patterns, disrupt the continuity of the urban street wall, or otherwise hinder the creation of a pedestrian-oriented environment, because the development has been designed to enhance the walkability on all street-facing sides of the property, and new sidewalks and street trees are included as part of the development. The project will not significantly modify the basic standards of the zone district to the extent that it adversely affects the established or future character of the neighborhood, because aside from the financing need to split the development into two parcels, the development could be built by right. The proposed development will retain as many natural features of the landscape as practicable because no original site features exist as the development will occur on previously developed property. The project will result in increased green space and tree canopy. Public or private infrastructure and services already exist and are adequate to support the proposed development. The project would not be detrimental to the financial stability or economic welfare of the city because the use will encourage other investment in the area, and the project will help meet the demand for affordable and market rate housing. The project will provide urban open space or other amenities that serve a public purpose because the proposed urban open space area is large enough to provide opportunity to allow for public space gathering. And the request is necessitated by a condition related to the site or structure and is not a means to reduce cost or inconvenience because the request is necessary due to the need to split the parcel for financing, otherwise the development could be built by right. Be it further resolved that the following conditions of approval shall apply to this project. Standard conditions at A, approvals, striking 5 that I'll read since they haven't been read yet but are on the screen. That the application and plans submitted by the applicant and signed, dated, and stamped by the planning director shall constitute the approved plans, except if plan elements do not meet ordinance requirements and are as amended in this resolution. That the use shall operate according to the application and per testimony as recorded in the planning commission minutes. That this approval does not include any proposed signs, and any future signs shall be subject to the requirements of Article 15 of the ordinance and permits received prior to installation. That a land use development services or LUDS permit, building permit, and all other required permits be obtained from the City of Grand Rapids prior to construction, demolition, or operation. That the project will comply with all other applicable city ordinances and policies and all state laws. That this approval shall take effect 16 calendar days after the date of the Planning Commission decision. And B, that agreements appropriate to allow cross-access, shared parking, and any shared utilities recorded with the Kent County Register of Deeds shall be required prior to the issuance of LUDS permits.
Support.
All right, we have a motion and support. Any final discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion passes. Thank you. Our next case is, let's see, 201, 225, 233, and 301 Market Ave Southeast. Kristen, are you going to introduce this? All right.
All right, this request is for a special land use to consider a 12,000-seat outdoor amphitheater. There are other aspects of this request that do necessitate special land use and planning commission approval, including the sale of alcohol service, a street-side plaza along Market, and as well as mobile food vending with other outdoor activities. So you'll note that this application has been written a bit broadly in terms of the nature of the uses. A project of this scale and scope, we wanted to make sure that there was some flexibility in terms of how big the street side plaza is, where the alcohol uses might take place or the vending, to provide a little bit of flexibility so as the development gets further into the architecture, we understand fully the nature and the impact of the use, but the specificity by which the Planning Commission traditionally reviews an application is a little bit challenging when we have projects such as this. So we've used that same approach for several other developments in the city. Downtown Market would come to mind, and it has proved effective and useful. Given the scale and complexities of the project, I think it would probably be best if I turned the remaining presentation over to the applicant, as I fear that a lengthy presentation by staff would just prove to be redundant. And certainly if there's any questions and concerns, both myself and the applicant can be available to assist. So I'm not sure, Bill or Kara, if you'd like to take over from here.
Thank you, Kristen. I'm Kara Wood, I feel a little too at home here. Kara Wood, Executive Director of Grand Action 2.0. We are a nonprofit organization that works on high-profile economic development projects here in the city, collectively with our partners. And we have a lot of partners involved in this project here. Most importantly, the City of Grand Rapids, with the ownership of the property, and the Kent County Grand Rapids Convention Arena Authority. So with that, we have been working alongside partners, working toward the designs that you see in front of you and the request before you today. So with that, we're fortunate to have many exemplary architects here in our community. And with me today is our executive architect, Bill Culhane.
Thank you, Kara. Thanks, Kristen. So I'd like to take you through the presentation that you may have seen if you had an opportunity to go to our open house or any of the other community engagements that have taken place in the last 6 weeks. This project has been in the public view for quite some time. I'll go back a little bit to some of the initial ideas behind the project. In 2021, it was a joint alliance between the city and the county and Grand Action that hired a planning firm named Populous, who partnered with Progressive, my firm, and did some community engagement and some long-term planning and ideation around this 31-acre development or potential development. And so today we're here just to talk about the 10.5 acre amphitheater, but I think it's good to go back a little bit and take a look at that. And if I can operate this, these are some of our final images. Apologize. So the development that Populous looked at back in 2021 goes from Wealthy all the way up to Fulton, and its primary focus was the area between Market Avenue and the river. During that time, Populous and Progressive met with 25 different stakeholder groups. We engaged in 4 other larger scale community engagement activities and really looked at what this development could be over the course of the next 30 years. One of the things, if you've driven Market Avenue in the last year, one of the things that we needed to do to get that property in a state of development was the relocation of the 13-foot diameter Market Avenue trunk sewer. If you recall, some 25 years ago, we did something very similar on Monroe when we relocated that trunk sewer out from underneath the Hall of Justice, the police department, and the DeVos Performance Hall parking area. Similar, for that land to be developable, for it to be unencumbered by that large area, we needed to get that out of there. So not part of this project, but part of the vision of creating an opportunity on this site. I think some of my slides are near the end of this. If you don't mind, I'll go through a few of these, and I apologize. Oh, I'm past my, I thought Elizabeth had put the presentation into the packet.
Laura, do you know, sorry, Bill, do you know if the presentation was included in this?
It was, but we didn't know what was intended to be included, so we sort of made a decision to take some things out, but we'll save the form again.
Okay,
So it can be,
so we can put it back up?
yes.
Okay.
And it got to be, when it got to be 100 pages, even I was a little concerned about that, so that's fine. I can use this to illustrate. So this is the overall site that's commonly known as 201 Market Avenue. Everyone's familiar with the Salt Dome at the northwest corner of the site. We know that city maintenance and operation services are on this site. The study that came out of the initial Populous planning study identified this 10.5 acre site located just south of the Market Avenue 131 exit as a location for the amphitheater. They also identified potential future housing development to the south down past Wealthy, and then of course the private properties that are owned north of 131 as again potential mixed-use development opportunities. But again, focusing in on the amphitheater site, if you saw some of the early images that were in the media that were never submitted as part of any initiative with the Planning Commission, you would have seen the amphitheater facing sort of south and west. Those were some preliminary sketches and ideas. The team that put that together, when we started to look at what that might how that might impact the community, how that might impact some of the residences to the south and to the west, and also the area around the Salt Dome was in that design, in that planning scheme, significantly underutilized. We were turning sort of our back on the river a little bit. We were trying to fit that into the little triangular shape around the 131 river connection. And what we determined was that it was really underutilizing that land and underutilizing those opportunities. So by rotating the amphitheater, not only did we turn potential noise disturbance from the Roosevelt Park neighborhood, some of the neighborhoods to the southwest, but we also were able to open up that land in the northwest corner. Sorry, I'm going to search here. Yep. So as you can see from this layout, the area that is, do I have a pointer on here or no? I don't, sorry. The amphitheater is sitting, is there a pointer? And I'm not. Oh, okay, thanks. So this area here is our building. Our stage house sits here. The fixed seating area is here. And then this area inside where I'm tracing my cursor, this is the lawn seating area. So the project has 7,000 fixed seats, 5,000 lawn seats for a total of 12,000 seats. Outside of this area here, this area is what I was talking about that was in our previous design, was very underutilized. It's approximately 2.2 acres. It is part of the it would be part of the property transaction, but that area would be developed as an open green space. This is our primary access to the river from the Market Avenue public right-of-way. We're really opening that up and creating an opportunity to connect with the future Riverwalk that is currently being planned and was, I believe, referenced in the previous presentation. The Riverwalk would come along here. We've designated 50 feet along the river that would be retained by the city, and that development of that Riverwalk in conjunction with our connections and our pedestrian connections would provide that free, clear, and equitable access to the river for everyone. We also have a connection on the south side. Here we've included a pedestrian walkway here that would also connect to that Riverwalk. So at the north end of our property and at the south end, we provided connectivity to the river. And again, this area out here would be developed and potentially house activities during non-event days and event days inside the amphitheater. Some of the concerns about rotating that to the north were, what does the sound do, right? We're an amphitheater, so we don't want to ignore the fact that music is the function of the event. So we did an acoustical analysis. We hired a firm called Solis O'Brien. And what they did is they put together a sound model. They put together a virtual model of our architecture of our amphitheater and also the topography and surrounding architecture of the area.
We're just loading up the other presentation for you, Bill, sorry.
Thanks. No, that's okay.
Don't look.
So I can continue to talk about that process. So we created a virtual model not only of our proposed amphitheater, but also the buildings and the topography of that are existing. We brought them to town. They did a 48-hour baseline sound study. So they went down to 201 Market. They set up meters and monitors. They monitored the sound over a 48-hour period. The low end of the sound in that area is around 48 decibels. The high end in that area is 73 decibels. So as you can probably imagine, if you look at the chart, it's night and day, right? It's when trucks and other things are active, that's when the sound readings are the highest. It's an average decibel reading of 66 decibels in that area over that 48-hour period. Then we created, and if you look here, right here, item number 19, that's our sound mixing board station, right where the cursor is in the middle of the diagram. So what we did is we took the stage house, item number 9 on the screen, and we created a 100 decibel sound source based on musical performance. We measured the sound level at the mixing board, and then we took the sound levels in various aspects of not only on-site, but around the area. And let's see here. Whoops. Do you know if our work is if what we submitted was at the beginning or end of this? I apologize. We have a graphic that would help me explain this a little bit better, so, perfect.
There you go.
Thanks. Kara needed this slide to talk a little bit about Grand Action, but I'm not going to invite her back up. This is an image of that site. This is the breakdown of the overall acreage out of memory.
Laura, can you go pop in and see if Travis might be available in case?
I think it's just catching up with the,
It's catching up.
I think it's just catching up with the graphics.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I think the graphics might be a little overwhelming.
That could be why we had to downsize it a little bit for our presentation, sorry.
Well, you can speed read some of these things while I'm flipping through here. So what the image will show when it eventually comes up is what we were able to do is the decibel readings inside the amphitheater. First of all, if I could describe the environment to you, we have the lawn seating goes up 40 feet above the stage. And then we have a security fence and landscaping at the back of that lawn seating area. And what you'll see on the graphic is the darker red colors and orange colors, which represent the higher decibel readings, are contained within that berm and the amphitheater. We do have some sounds that are spreading across there that reach into the 72 to 77 decibel reading, which is similar to the sound of a hairdryer or a vacuum or maybe a shop vac. Once we get outside the venue, you'll see that the images and the sound decibel readings are dropping significantly into the 62 to 72 decibel range. And then over the course of, by reaching the expressway, you'll see a real change in the decibel readings at that expressway. I always want to say the expressway acts as a natural buffer. It's not natural. But in those lower frequency sounds, the only thing that really mitigates or stops the lower frequency sounds is mass. And so we're fortunate to have the mass of the berm. We're also fortunate to have the mass of the expressway, which do a really nice job mitigating the overall sound levels that are leaving the amphitheater property. So since the Populous, I'll go back to the Populous community engagement. Since the community engagement with Populous, we did community engagement with Rossetti Architects in 2022, and then Progressive Architecture and Engineering recently completed community engagement with 8 different groups, 2 business organizations, 5 residential associations here in Grand Rapids, and then also through DGRI business group. So we're generally hearing, this is great, thank you very much. So we're generally hearing similar things, and I'll go ahead and jump in right here, because what we're generally hearing is parking is one of the concerns. 12,000 seat amphitheater next to a 12,000 seat arena, with the Griffins hopefully going deep into the playoffs in the spring, and concerts being played here. We could potentially have 24,000 people coming down to this area. So we did a study and a parking analysis, and we noted that within a 15-minute radius, using a walking radius, realizing that people are going to arrive at the site differently through various levels of mobility, but we used walking radius. of 15 minutes, we have 18,500 existing parking spaces that are available. We've had conversation with Mobile GR. We've had conversations with the Rapid. And we've talked about ways that we can reduce the amount of vehicular traffic that comes down to the amphitheater on any given event. And so we're encouraging people to utilize those existing 18,000 parking spaces. If we were to calculate our parking contribution to the area, we'd take 12,000, divide that by 3, and we'd come up with roughly 4,000 parking spaces that would be utilized by the amphitheater. Potentially on dual nights, another 4,000 spaces that would be utilized by the arena. So still within that 18,500, well within that number of parking. So our parking that we are showing on site is minimal. It is the amount of parking that would be needed, not for general employees and staff, but just for operational needs of the amphitheater. So we currently are showing 116 parking spaces here, and not providing parking, but encouraging people to utilize existing parking. The next thing we looked at, again, is the mobility. How would people arrive at the site on any given night? We've looked at many different scenarios, people coming down early, partaking in whether it's dining, shopping, or other activities downtown, making their way to the concert, people afterwards leaving the concert, going to restaurants, bars, or other establishments. And so currently, these are the potential mobility routes. The pink line here shows the updated Dash route. And as you can see, it goes directly down Market Avenue. There are 2 planned stops, one on the west side and one on the east side of Market Avenue. So again, that makes lots as far away as, the Dash lots 7, 8, and 9 up here, viable options for people who would be coming to the amphitheater. Here's the graphic I was trying to describe. Hopefully, it looks like what you heard me say just a few minutes ago, but you can see this shape of the hill or the lawn area on the amphitheater really changes color dramatically and reduces those noise levels as they go. And then you can see what the expressway does here as it gets up to the expressway. By the time we get north of the expressway or even across Market Avenue, we're into those greens colors, which are significantly reduced noise levels outside the main amphitheater. Just a couple of things that we pulled out of the community engagement as a good reminder for me, because I kind of glossed over these at the beginning. But in our conversations with neighbors and businesses, embrace the location. I think you guys are all familiar with the location. It is covered with steel and asphalt. It's really an industrial-based use that is in a prime location within the city, taking up valuable river frontage. And we really wanted to open that up to the public. We really wanted to create an opportunity for people to access the river in a meaningful way. We wanted a world-class entertainment venue. We wanted it to be more than an entertainment venue, and this is feedback again from the groups that we met with. Some of the architecture that we have in the community, certainly the arena, the convention center, the Graham, and other pieces of architecture are iconic in the sense that they have drawn a spotlight to Grand Rapids, including a lot of the work that's been done on Medical Mile, contribute to the vibrancy and continued growth of the city of Grand Rapids, and then also to create a sustainable asset, to create something that the community can be proud of for the next 50 years. And so those are the goals that the design team was challenged with. Also, some of the other elements that came forward is, again, I talked about the river, but free, clear, and equitable access to the river. Opportunities for local, minority-owned pop-up businesses and growth in those areas. Part of the component that I didn't talk about that came out of some of those early discussions when we were talking about the entire 31-acre site was the need to fulfill some of the housing needs within the city of Grand Rapids. Connecting to the trail networks, providing the river as a destination for all and really creating multi-generational spaces. And then just a recap, 12,000 seat capacity, roughly 50 or 54 ticketed events a year, anticipating 300,000 visitors per season. Some of the economic numbers, $7 million in annual wages, nearly $500 million in economic impact forecasted over the next 30 years, additional 480 jobs. This is from the source of a CSL, a firm that was hired to take a look at this project and to do some economic forecasting. Fairly conservative numbers. I think if we look back on some of the things that have developed around the arena and the convention center and some of the other projects in town, I think people would look at these numbers and say from the past 30 years to the next 30 years, these might even be a little bit conservative, but I'm just going to quote their report. So our next steps, obviously, special land use application is one that we're here to talk about today. So sorry, went on a little bit longer than intended to, but thank you for giving me the opportunity. Kara and I can answer any questions that you have.
All right, thank you. Commissioners, questions?
I have some. So one of the kind of requirements outlined in the Mobile GR memo related to the traffic analysis was a trip generation analysis, and I'm wondering if that's been done, if that's reflected in kind of your parking slide, or if that's something yet to be.
Yep. I connected with Elizabeth last week and talked about the trip generation analysis, and should this outcome be favorable today, she said that we could submit that to planning afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah, Josh Naramore might be better equipped. We've had this conversation. So yes, Mobile GR is asking for a trip generation analysis, but it's not in context of should this be an allowable use or not. More appropriately, it sets a baseline for what the trip generation will have for this development. So then as we see future phases build out, we have more information that we can use to assess what infrastructure changes or modifications might be needed. I don't know if Josh, if you have anything, I covered it? Okay, good. I contacted Mobile GR because I thought that might be a little bit confusing with the addition of it, but it is not. We do not believe it's necessary for your consideration, but we do believe it's necessary for understanding of future phases.
Gotcha. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
And then related to coordination with MDOT for the proximity to the Market Street US 131, I did see in your engagement that you've met with the Grand Region planner.
Yep.
Is there ongoing, there are going to have to be more conversations, I assume.
Yes.
Related to.
So our initial conversations with MDOT centered around some of our desires to know what their plans were. I think everyone knows that we would, certain people would love to get rid of the Market Avenue exit. MDOT has even identified that in their long-range planning. But honestly, 5 years ago, they told me 10 years. And just this last month, they told me 10 years, maybe. So that's on their long-range planning. We also talked to them about two other things. We talked to them about exiting during concert events and coordinating that not only with MDOT but also with Mobile GR. And that's, again, ongoing. And then the other concern was lights from the venue maybe going and distracting drivers on 131, or lights from 131 coming in and potentially interfering with the show. And so currently 131, I think at that location, is right around 632, 634 elevation, and we're at 640 with the top of our berm, and then a potential landscaping on top of that. So we are mitigating and reducing light that is might be distracting to drivers. And they were that's a no-go for them. That's a hard no for them. So we had to make sure that our light angles were not interfering.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and there's clearly additional reviews and conversations that need to take place as part of this project, and that's not dissimilar to other large-scale developments that take place within the city. This is but one approval process that they must go through, but it's sort of, if the Planning Commission doesn't find the use to be appropriate, how do you have those other conversations, or why, and so there's only so many details that can be sorted out before we understand whether the Planning Commission finds this to be an appropriate use at this location.
And then I'm also wondering, so you had really a good summary of the engagement that you've done in terms of who you've talked to, but I'm wondering what the results were of the outreach with, like, the direct neighbors, like the folks that live in that Market Avenue apartment complex?
Yep. So the neighbors in the Roosevelt Parks neighborhood, that was the first group that we actually met with, predominantly south of Wealthy. Their primary concerns were truck routes and whether or not everybody, I think, is familiar with, I say everybody, most people, because it's in the news, are familiar that Taylor Swift travels with 22 semis. Her show has a lot of traffic. And so they were concerned about what route would these semis be taking, because a considerable amount of traffic already comes from the existing uses on that site. So we assured them that the marshaling yard for trucks and the staging would not be going south of Wealthy, would not be going through their neighborhood. Generally, that was their number one thought. We did meet with the Downtown Neighborhood Association. Some of the concerns they had were the number of people that might be coming into Grand Rapids, not necessarily from a vehicular sense, but from a pedestrian sense, and how that might impact some of those neighborhoods. It was interesting. We met with one named neighborhood association. We met with one named business association, both having the same name, Heartside. As you can imagine, the business owners were very enthusiastic about it and looked for long-term opportunities to connect and partner with the amphitheater, not only to get people to the amphitheater, but to get people from the amphitheater activities to their businesses. The neighborhood association was again concerned about the amount of pedestrian traffic, about the length of time that pedestrian traffic might be in the area, as well as parking. That particular neighborhood, we did, at the end of the meeting, we committed to continuing to work with them to allay some of their concerns and their thoughts. They had some very practical applications. One of them was, and if you can see on my graphic here, this is our one of the facilities that will be restrooms here at the corner. We also have a building over here. Maybe it's best if I go back a few slides. Yep. So this building here is a restroom building. This building here is also a restroom building.
So for the purposes of the minutes, we can say the northeast building is restroom building and the southwest building is restrooms.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Thank you, Kristen. I should be talking in terms of direction. One of the suggestions they had was if someone enters a public park currently, according to the ordinance and the law, after dusk to use the restroom, they could be arrested for being in a public park after dark. So one of the things that they encouraged us to do was potentially make those restrooms more accessible. Although this won't be a public park, it's the intention of the Convention Arena Authority to make this space open and operational during non-event times. And one of the comments they had was if someone needed to use a restroom, if they were going to be open to the public, that access without going into the park would be desirable for them. And something, honestly, that I never thought about. And so we've agreed to continue to work with them and to influence some of the planning elements around the periphery. As you can imagine, the core of the amphitheater is very technical, right? Has very stringent requirements with regards to acoustics, to sound, to lighting, operations. But some of these amenity buildings on the periphery, we have an opportunity to, again, allow that community input to help us shape those interactions.
wondered if you had an opportunity to look at other cities that have a urban type of amphitheater like this. And I noted that this is to close by 11 o'clock at night.
Yep.
Is that consistent with other amphitheaters and their experience with that?
Yep. 11 o'clock is, compared to other cities that have downtown urban amphitheaters, 11 o'clock is early, but it's not unheard of. And so it is our intent, as we submitted in the information, it's our intent to conclude shows by 11 o'clock, subject to, I shouldn't say subject to, but taking into consideration areas outside of our control. Sometimes lightning, weather can delay a show. Pine Knob, 2 years ago, there was a major accident on I-75, and the Pine Knob exit was blocked. And so at the beginning of the show, they only had about 9,000 of their 15,000 seat venue. So they were able to work with local officials to postpone the start of the show. State police obviously were involved trying to clear the accident. So in that instance, 2 years ago, they postponed the show a half an hour. And then they were able to start the show when the majority of the guests had arrived. There are sometimes technical difficulties, right, with the equipment. So some of those considerations we would ask be taken into account, but it's our intent to conclude by 11. Nashville, Tennessee, to answer your first question, is the most like this. If you're familiar with the Ascend Amphitheater in Nashville, it's on a river, it's next to an expressway, and it's in downtown Nashville. And so they are currently one of the venues that does conclude their shows around 11 o'clock. So.
I've been to many a concert that starts later than what it says. Is there a way that you can control for some of those things? I mean, particularly in an outside where you're going to have things going on in terms of contracts with entertainers and things.
Yeah. One of the biggest things that we have to our advantage is the majority of the traveling shows will have somewhere to go tomorrow. And so what we're told by concert promoters and by ASM Global, who does manage several amphitheaters across the United States, and they have access to those shared experiences. And what we're told is that they need to get the show started on time. They need to get the show done because they need to break down, be on the road, and be in Chicago by 6 a.m. the next morning. So that's really the biggest thing that's influencing the timing of the show, and their desire to start on time and their desire to end the show on time, pack up all their semi-trucks, and move on to the next location. We did get some feedback from one of the amphitheaters in Indianapolis, and they are, over the course of 2 years, they've had 2 shows that have had to go past their allotted time. And so that's roughly 2% of the time.
Okay.
But it's a business and it's a schedule that's based on getting in, getting entertainment going, and getting out, because again, they have another obligation in the next city the next night.
And hopefully the staff report reflected that, you know, given the uniqueness of this use, going back to some earlier comments that I made, you know, we understood that the events would typically complete by 11, but we also understood that there would be some fluctuation, and in some cases would be outside their control, the lightning example and accidents. So we were trying to make sure that we gave, that we were supportive of some flexibility, but also have some boundaries on what that would look like.
You know, I recall being at Meyer Gardens a couple of years ago and a thunderstorm, and we could see it coming in, and then they canceled the show like halfway through it. So there must be standards that you have for whether and safety,
Yep,
you would think. I would
there
think.
are. Yep, that's a good point.
It never happens where we both try to talk at the same time. I'm wondering if you could, or Ms. Wood, if you wouldn't mind coming up and talking a little bit about the public meeting that occurred a couple of weeks ago, or maybe it was last week, and sort of what were some of the outcomes from that you were able to sort of fold into this in terms of that knowledge from the public?
Sure. The public open house that was held on June the 12th, we had about 100 participants throughout the course of the 2 hours that were there. There was a short presentation given up front, and then opportunity for community members to engage on specific topics, whether it be traffic or parking, the site plan itself, among others. What Bill has shared with you already are the similar concerns and questions that came up during that open house. So there wasn't anything outside of those topics that were raised. Bill, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
No, I do have a document I was going to,
Microphone, Bill.
oh, yeah, sorry. I'm used to just yelling. I'm a former coach. I do have a document outlining all the questions from all the community engagement meetings. I didn't get a chance to email it to Kristen before I came down here, but we can make this available to you immediately after the meeting.
I was just curious if there were any plans for some of these vendors, some of the food stalls on non-show days to kind of hang around, because I'm kind of picturing like a similar concept with this amphitheater is like a Red Rocks in Colorado, where it's a public space on non-show days for people to just kind of go there, hang out. It's a tourist attraction. So as, I guess, the sake of trying to help with some small businesses, allowing them to set up there on non-show days. People can go there, try some food, different shops and stuff like that. I think I saw it in some of the public comment sections as well, with just making it more inclusive for those small businesses so people can stop by and then also hang out there at the amphitheater. So I was happy to hear that it's also going to be open to the public, it sounded like, on non-show days, and then also some of those amenities to be used while people are just kind of hanging out there for some period as well.
Yeah, yep, great question, thank you. So this is our plaza area that is shown, and it might be a good idea if I could share with you sort of the line of demarcation between event and non-event spaces. So this area here, I know it's a little hard to see the detail of it, but this is an outdoor seating area, outdoor dining area with shade canopies. That's the red that you see in here. Underneath those shade canopies are tables and chairs for outdoor dining experiences. Our line of separation between an event day of ticketed and non-ticketed would come down here where these lights are, would come down around and turn where this planter is, and then close off here. So ticketed individuals could come in during an event and dine in this area, be part of the concert, hear it, but not necessarily be maybe in their seats. They'd have to be they'd have to have a ticket, they'd have to have a seat to get into this area. Then they could move back and forth between this dining area and the amphitheater itself. The extended line of security goes around and out here and then returns back to the building and then goes up to the top of the hill, where we would either have a security fence or potentially a masonry wall. As I say masonry wall because as the development of the amphitheater evolves, and we look at potential need maybe to mitigate some of that sound that I talked about earlier, we are still studying whether or not that could be a landscaped area with a fence or a landscaped area with a hard wall. Which again would help us with some of the sound if there were some concerns about that. This space here, our renderer got a little aggressive with the landscaping on the backside of this berm. We're anticipating this would be lawn area where people kids could run up and roll down, people could spread out blankets and sit. This is all going to be designed and accessible as a public park. It'll be managed, maintained, and monitored by the Convention Arena Authority, but it would be access to the park. When I go back a couple of slides, this road here is also our required by the fire department. This is our fire access route. Rather than just put an asphalt drive there that fulfills the requirement of the fire department, we're going to make that a wider area. It's obviously has to support a 22,000 pound fire truck. So we're also opening this up to food trucks Fridays, like if you've been down to Riverside Park during Food Truck Fridays, this would be an area for food trucks to park and to create activity space. Of course, they would have to, apply for permits for that type of event. Additionally, there's room inside of this plaza here for potential food trucks or vendors, and then this out here is a public plaza here at the corner as well. So during non-events, those areas would be open to the public. They would be accessible. Activities and events would be coordinated through the Convention Arena Authority and ASM Global as their manager. But those are the areas of the development that would be open for potential vendors, food and or otherwise.
And that's an example of how we noticed for mobile food vending, but we didn't have an exact location on the site because we wanted to provide that flexibility, understanding that we want these spaces activated, we want them to be used. And so we did kind of have that general noticing and explanation that we know or we anticipate, we hope that there will be mobile food vending, but work in progress, whether it's along that fire access lane or within the plaza, we have that flexibility structured within your consideration so that can take place.
Kristen, again, going back to the question I had earlier, is this, I don't recall the master riverfront plan, but I know that one of the goals is to have access to the river either for boating and fishing or other things. Is there potential here, or has sites been identified that will open up that river even more to activities?
Okay, so I might phone a friend, my city engineer here. But generally speaking, there wouldn't be access to the water at this location. Mr. Bergman, why don't you answer this question for me so I don't? So there is a 50-foot strip of land that will be along the river that will be retained by the city.
Okay,
and so we will develop that river walk, and you can see that there is an expectation, and it's showing here that there will be access over this parcel to that riverfront, but Mr. Bergman can better explain the interaction between that walk and the river itself.
Thank you.
And I was literally authoring a text to Kristen saying, I'm going to leave for a meeting. Doesn't sound like you need anything from me here. So not a moment too soon. No, exactly as she stated, we are retaining a 50-foot strip and in the design process now for kind of that river edge walkway. Two of the objectives with that, though, is to enhance access to the river, but also increase flood protection. And those are two competing, conflicting interests, because one of them you're trying to get down, the other you're trying to raise up. And so the design is considering all those objectives and those goals, but we'll look for ways to increase those opportunities to potentially get down to and touch the river. Certainly much better than what you're able to today with the vertical concrete walls. So,
Thank you.
Yep.
I didn't realize there'd be, I heard there was going to be public access, but I haven't seen the pictures, and so that I think is a great component.
Yeah, you can see that strip in the gray area that's just, on the top side of the screen, but on the west side of the amphitheater property.
I'm wondering if you could take us through how drop-offs would go with, that would be a big part of, I think, people coming and going.
Yep, so moving people in and out as quickly as possible. This being our main entry plaza, we're anticipating that this is where the majority of drop-offs would take place. We've also accounted for along Market Avenue, kind of at the bottom of the screen, for potential Uber drop-offs and other type of drop-offs along there. We're anticipating anybody who enters the facility from the west side, here where the cursor is, that they would be pedestrians, or they would take some type of mobility using a scooter or a bike. We've accounted for private bikes in this area as well. We've even talked about partnering up with, if you remember the old Festival of the Arts, They used to have the bike corral right down by, I was going to say Fifth Third, but Old Kent Bank at that time. So we were talking about for private bikes, having sort of that bike corral that would be most likely sponsored by some type of local business. We also have taken into account, and my engineer is here, we have 6 locations for the mobility scooters and bikes that if people were to take them to the event, we've identified 6 locations on the site for those to be parked. And then, of course, recharged and utilized by other people. So primarily along Market Avenue at that main entrance, and again, other types of pedestrian or non-motorized, I guess those are motorized scooters, but non-motorized vehicles we've anticipated would come in either along the Riverwalk or along the Market Avenue area. Thank you.
Other questions at this point, commissioners? All right, thank you. I'll have you take a seat. I'll open up the public hearing. If you're here today on this case regarding the amphitheater, I invite you to come forward, state your name, and share your brief thoughts with us.
My name is Hal Fruit. I live at Plaza Towers. I'm going to try to do this in somewhat of an order, but maybe jumping around a little bit. First, I'm in favor of the project overall. I think it's a good thing. And in fairness, Kara's my neighbor, so I need to be a good neighbor. However, in the Grand Rapids Press article that I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have read, that came out on Sunday's paper, talks about the venue was rotated 180 degrees to face north. Doing so was designed to project more sound towards the core downtown where less residential housing is. Well, that's not quite true. Part of this project envisions putting in 1,500 residential units in the Charlie's Crab area and the Amway Surface parking lot, which this would point directly at, plus Plaza Towers, the JW Marriott, Amway Grand Plaza, and Bridgewater as sound moves north to up the river. The other thing we talked about was sound. It was supposed to be a 3D rendering of the sound, which was supposed to be mentioned.
Which I owe you.
Oh, you?
I will get it to you.
That 3D rendering is not here yet. We don't have that on how the sound is going to be projecting. Talking about the berm, the amphitheater is 2 feet above the S-curve. I was talked about that for lighting. So how the S-curve is going to block sound, I have no idea when the amphitheater is above the S-curve. So a couple of sound issues. Transportation and drop-off that was mentioned. Talking about Market. Market is a one-lane street now. Talk about congestion, that's going to be backed up way going north on Market, down a 1 lane each way in front of the amphitheater. Let's see what else. Talking about engagement. Plaza Towers and the residents and my neighbors have never been interviewed on this until the public meeting that was on the 12th of this month, which was 2 weeks ago. So while the South was talked to, Roosevelt area, downtown was not. Let's see. 100 decibels. They're talking about 100 decibels for concerts. Those of you that go to concerts, how many of you think you're at 100 decibels? That's low. So to take that as a baseline for what's going to be projected for music and sound level, I think is a bit ridiculous, I guess. I don't think that's quite accurate. Let's see. I think that is most of what I've got in here. As I'm running out of time, I think that's about it. So I think the project is good, but please consider the sound, especially going past 11 o'clock. If anything, I would like to see a 1-year moratorium at 10 o'clock. If everything goes great, as is supposed to, make it 11 o'clock after that, but don't give us 11 o'clock to start with. Low volume noises, low frequencies travel a lot further than high frequencies.
All right, thank you. Anyone else here on this case?
Hey, how's it going? Lucas Leverett. I live in the First Ward. I'm a member of the West Grand Board, but I'm not here to speak on behalf of the board. Big fan of this. It fits a lot of my mantras. Some of you in the room and on the dais have probably seen me repeatedly at lots of meetings like this. You expect me to come trash everything. That's just because I got to this city expecting to be an optimist and even-keeled, and then the cops went and killed somebody after being told they might do it for 20 years. So I had to go into mad mode. But I'm kind of like the Hulk. I'd like to show you more Bruce Banner occasionally, but I had to go rage mode for about a year. Let's get into that balance a little bit because I'm a big fan of this, but it needs a little work. I'm glad Bill brought up Nashville because I'm exactly 2 years in from my relocation here as a Nashville-born wild Southerner. So, family's been involved with the entertainment industry for a long time. I am 45. We hemmed and hawed about our amphitheater my whole adult life in Nashville. So I'm really glad to see Grand Rapids moving it right along. I was around for all this fallout about sound levels, and I was there to personally witness showdowns between cops and the promoter's security at the street level having fights over who belonged where. There's a murky process and lack of transparency in GR with basically everything. So that means I've got a lot of concerns that I want to bring up. And they're not necessarily your concerns in planning, but we, the citizens, never know where to plug them in. So I'm going to have to touch on them today. A lot of it's about keeping ASM and the CAA under control and in franchising the citizens. These are general topics. A lot of this is being discussed by our neighborhood board, but also a lot of other organizations and groups. Parking needs to be more thoroughly planned and committed. A commitment for an on-site adjacent ramp along the way during development needs to be agreed upon for completion no later than a soccer stadium is added. Currently, the parking is being presented in a vacuum for the most part, with no express concern for simultaneous events which all impact all the neighborhoods and nearby overruns, especially if Dash is successful as a park and ride option. Our neighborhoods become the parking lots. This needs to be first in a lineup of partnerships between public transit and all large venues to mitigate the lack of parking. Vital Streets and the Rapid tend to do things in a vacuum. They tend to do things like a one-lane market that we just talked about that don't really work with some of the other things that are being presented. We need to seize the opportunity for vast equity, such as a small ticket premium, to be directed toward housing and other concerns. Imagine $12,000 per event being raised, over $500,000 a year, with just a $1 per ticket premium. Priority needs to be given to hiring short and long-term employees from inside the city limits, preferably those that can use transit or walking. Legally binding commitments need to exist that the walk and park will always be kept open and promoters cannot force them to be closed to the public during concerts. See those fights I saw at Nashville. The venue also needs to be a ticket freedom venue and kick the Ticketmaster monopoly out of the equation, require no mandatory use of Ticketmaster. These are concerns that I'm hoping we can bring in the conversation along the way. Right now, I'm going to ask you to table this. There are far too many questions. I think there needs to be further engagement. There needs to be a community benefits agreement, at least drafted into all of this other presentation.
All right. Thank you, sir.
You didn't even get to see the comments that the public had beforehand. You had to ask about them. So I'd say table it, please.
Anyone else from the public on this case? All right, I will close the public hearing. Anything you'd like to address is raised in the public hearing?
Thank you. I would like to formally apologize to Hal because I did tell him that I would have the 3D analysis of the sound prior to today. We did meet on June 8th. We talked about sound. I would like to identify some of the buildings that Hal noted are between a half mile and a mile away from this venue. The sound attenuation over that period is going to drop significantly to the levels of less than 45 decibels, which is soft speech. So some of those concerns that Hal has, I have promised him that I will address and have promised him on 3 different occasions since June 8th. So I will do that, Hal. As far as some of the other concerns, again, parking and the number of pedestrians downtown, we feel like we've talked about simultaneous events. I talked about that in parking. We talked about 18,500 parking spaces available within a mobility radius of less than 15 minutes. So I think that unless you have any questions about anything else that was raised, just like to offer those comments.
I have one question related to the sound, the analysis you did. The gentleman mentioned lower frequencies versus higher frequencies. Can you talk about how that was incorporated into the study?
Yep. So lower frequencies tend to travel further, right? That's where you get the vibration. That's where you get the bass, thumping in your chest. The only thing that stops lower frequency is mass. The mass of the hill is equivalent to, if you can sort of wrap your mind around this, if we filled up 200 dump trucks a day and we ran those for 100 days straight, that's the amount of earth that we're going to import into this site and to create this berm. And it'll be high enough, to absorb a significant amount of that sound. And again, if I could get you to envision this shape at the top of the berm, and then if we go forward and we just look at this orange piece right here. Look at the shape of the orange and the yellow orange, and you can see that a significant amount of that sound is absorbed or mitigated by that hill. One other technical point, I indicated that when we were talking about the floor plan, I indicated that the 100 decibel reading was at the mixing board. So that's greater, obviously, than 100 decibels at the stage area. So we calculated the mixing board at the back of our fixed seating area, 100 decibels. Any other questions about the?
Yeah, I had one question about the setup. Did you say there was a hard line too with the highway being above the amphitheater, just for like the visibility?
Yeah, as you can see how this yellow plume flattens out here over the highway. The highway is also, we didn't talk about this because we talked about the massive concrete structure that makes up the S-curve. But the highway also acts as a mixing area, right? Some of the sound from the highway, especially during rush hour, is going to exceed 80, 90 decibels, right? If you get, motorcycles going up and down the expressway, we all know that immediately adjacent to a motorcycle, you could exceed, 95 decibels there. And so it acts also as significantly as a mixing area for all of that noise.
Yes, sorry, my concern was more with not so much the sound, it was the distraction for drivers, I guess.
Oh, okay, yeah, the berm is higher than the S-curve. So you will not be able to see in the venue from the S-curve, nor will lights escape the venue and distract drivers on the S-curve. Yeah, that was a study we had to do for MDOT.
I remember back when the Van Andel Arena was built that they made an agreement. This goes to the question about community outreach and involvement to hire a number of people from the Hartside District. And given that the convention center runs both of these places, is that included in this, or are they using the same hiring facilities? Are these new jobs, or are they jobs augmented through the Van Andel Arena?
Yep. So the authority that would run this, own it and operate it, is the same authority that owns and operates the Van Andel Arena and the DeVos Place Convention Center. So those human resources, those hiring practices, those community engagements would be with the owner-operator Convention Arena Authority, and would expect, unfortunately, the executive director couldn't be with us today, but I would imagine that they would continue those same hiring practices and agreements.
Yeah, and that, I wasn't sure what your question was, if it was about simultaneous events and such, which would be relevant, I'm presuming, but hiring practices and jobs and such would be outside of a land use decision.
I understand that, but they did talk about the economic benefit and jobs, and I just wanted to see if there had been any in response to the questions that were asked.
In your parking discussion, you show, and the map, you show Grand Valley's parking facilities as included in the 18,000.
Yep.
And I wasn't under the impression that Grand Valley shared their parking.
So we've had preliminary conversations with Grand Valley about potentially partnering because of the proximity. There is, not part of this project, but there is a long-term plan to create a bridge across the river that would land on the GVSU property and in the 50-foot easement or 50-foot property that's owned by the city. That was indicated on our, that's this element up here at the top of the page, potential future. So it's about, I think it was less than 3,000 spaces. So if we were not able to reach an agreement with Grand Valley, we would drop from 18,500 to 16,000. Again, still significantly exceeding the potential 8,000 spaces for a dual event.
Can you talk about the decision to use 105 decibels as your baseline? Is that just standard for the third party that you contracted with to do the study?
Yep, so rock and roll music, the loudest of all the musics, is typically at that decibel level. And I believe, I say don't quote me on this, although I think we're being recorded. I believe that there's a national OSHA regulation about sound exposure above 105 decibels.
Will that be written into contracts with ACTS? I understand that you may not be the person that's managing these agreements with ACTS, but will this be something that's easily controlled?
It's certainly a standard part of contracts for certainly even urban amphitheaters, more so than Red Rock, which was mentioned earlier, or other locations that are more remote. So that would be something that could be reasonably expected to be into their contracts.
It's also part of the application and the testimony for this project that is the baseline expectation. So that would be one of the enforcement components should there be an issue that we needed to look into.
Did the modeling include wall on the top of the berm, like you alluded to, or did it include landscaping, or did it include
modeling?
nothing?
Currently does not include that, so that's certainly something we could add to mitigate and modify those sound requirements.
Because the one image in our packet has a blue, looks like a wall.
Oh, does it? Yeah, I'd have to go back and look.
I think there's a small retaining wall.
Yeah.
Seating wall, almost like a seat wall, not literally a seat wall, but a small retaining wall that goes along that perimeter area before it drops off on the backside of the hill.
And those are some of the continued analysis we would do around sound, and some of those things that Hal and I talked about running that 3D. The images we gave you are obviously a two-dimensional representation of sound in a 3D model. I told Hal that I'd get him a couple of sections through there so he could understand what the sound was going to be like outside his window.
Any other questions for the applicant?
Could you just repeat that number, the decibel number? You said the typical rock band
is 105. Yeah, if you look at sound meters, most of the top end of sound will be jet engines at around 110 or 120, 115, 120, and that rock band is right in that 105.
And that number comes from the study you had done?
That number comes from industry standard.
Got you.
Yeah.
So theoretically, we could go above that.
Theoretically, yes. Yeah, you could go above it.
And what's the likelihood that concert venues do go above it?
When you get above 100, it's uncomfortable. You start to, I mean, the participants start to feel discomfort, not only in their ears, but also, physically. So there are very few concerts that would exceed that over a period of time, just because it's not healthy over a 2-hour concert or a 3-hour concert.
Okay.
Like your mom always said, don't listen to your music too loud.
Well, me and my mother are both singers, so she never said that.
And again, keep in mind that this sound study is all part of any potential approval from the Planning Commission, and it's expected that if this is what information is provided, that is what the standard that they would be held to, especially as it relates to impact of adjacent properties.
All right, I'll have you take a seat, and any discussion, commissioners, on this case?
I'd actually like to yield some time to Hal. It looks like he has something to say.
I'm not sure if it's...
It's going to be about the decibels, and it's 3 questions we've asked. I feel like it's appropriate.
Right.
Please keep it brief and accurate.
Thank you very much.
I'd better not hear anything from Wikipedia out of your mouth right now.
Wikipedia. University of Michigan Health states that rock concerts average between 120 and 129 decibels.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I thank you for that question. I did a quick Google search myself, and I got the same answer, which is why I asked that to the applicant again.
What I'm hearing from Kristen is that while that may be the case, what we are approving is a more limited level. Yes, what we're considering approval of would be held to a more strict standard.
Yeah.
Now, whether that's doable, I think, is on them to manage.
Yeah, I think my next question is
That's
really
a
about just like
concern.
the enforcement of that, or like what does that look like? I
Right.
think if a constituent were to lodge a complaint, what does that look like? I would like to know that.
Yeah. So we do have a division, our Environmental Services Division does enforce the noise ordinance. And in another unrelated example, we also have a sound engineer consultant that they can help provide us with the technical analysis of the sounds that are being made from various uses. So if there is a concern about sound, first of all, we do have decibel readers that don't measure all aspects of sound, if you will. We talked about the low and the high frequencies, but we do have decibel readers, and our Environmental Services Division does the enforcement. If we find that the issue exceeds our internal capacity of enforcement and expertise, then we do have the sound consultant that we can utilize to help determine whether there is a violation of, in this case, either the special land use or the noise ordinance.
Or related to the changes that are being worked on for the noise ordinance, which is not something that we deal with, does that ordinance will that ordinance list specific decibel rates related to this kind of venue?
That has not been determined as of yet. That would be a code of ordinance that would be under the authority of the City Commission. It is acknowledged at this point that the sound ordinance would not support an amphitheater use, in that it would be far more limiting, and I dare say that it would, it just simply wouldn't be a tool that we could use for enforcement because of the nature of this use and the regulatory structure of the current noise ordinance. So that is in process, and I expect that that would be something that the City Commission would consider in the coming months. Mr. Hooker, I don't know if you have anything additional to add.
That's my understanding as well, is that it would not be, the proposal, their discussions at this point are focused more on hours than decibels. And as Kristen said, it would perhaps not be administratively feasible to impose particular decibel limits on a venue like this in this location, with all the surrounding noise and everything.
That's one of my concerns is that enforcement. When we've had other cases in front of us, we've been told that there's not the equipment, there's not the ability to measure those decibels, and I do know that the Environmental Department has that. In the past, we've not had that information when there's been complaints. So how would this differ?
Yeah, admittedly, I think you're right. In the past, we have been challenged with noise ordinance enforcement, and that is the reason why we engaged with the services of a sound consultant. And so that has provided us with the subject matter expertise that's needed when it comes to sound and impact and enforcement.
So this will change procedures, it sounds like, on the investigation and not rely on the police to make that finding, but on our Environmental Services Department?
I would say that the sound consultant was not brought in specific to this project. It's a completely unrelated situation that we found ourselves needing additional expertise for sound enforcement.
Okay.
And so we have that tool that would be available should we have particular concerns or issues with this venue. So we're better equipped today than we have been in the past to address noise complaints.
Okay, thank you.
Did you have more?
Yeah, I was just going to say, generally speaking, with decibels, it's a highly technical endeavor to measure them, and then also in an urban environment with all the surrounding noise, that just complicates the analysis. So, all that to say, it may be easier to control events by time than by decibels.
And the quote, I think the applicant made it clear that the on-stage sound could be, as was presented by the member of the public who quoted the study. What the applicant said, I heard, was that at the mixing stage it was a different number. So I think they explained why there were two different numbers that we're contemplating. I agree. It seems like regulating it by time is better than decibel levels. My only, I guess, real concerns are around the dropping off and the whole. It's hard to imagine. I think of experiences that I've had at venues like this, and there's always a lot of people in a short period of time, and I can imagine it working well when there's a lot of space. And I know a lot of, like around stadiums, roads get shut off so that the roadway can be used as pedestrian space, like at right outside the Red Sox stadium and lots of White Sox too, for that matter. I have a hard time imagining it here, and I'm not saying that I believe it can't work, but I have a hard time picturing it, honestly. Particularly with the off-ramp of 131 right there.
Yeah, those are my two concerns too. I definitely see like the site itself. They're doing things to mitigate the sound. I would say that I'm obviously just a little bit biased in this. I don't want this to be a quiet space. Music is an experience. People should be able to go to a concert venue like this and really experience it. That being said, it sounds like, obviously there are standards, there's expectations in terms of the amount of noise that are going to come from here, but there's no strict recourse. If the noise is higher, if folks, downtown are hearing this, do I think they'll intentionally do that? No, because you don't want to give people a free show, but there's still no stopping that, and I don't want police officers walking around with sound buttons in their hands trying to measure it. So yeah, the sound is a concern for me still, and then of course, what you just said, the traffic. I go to the Planet Fitness there, and it's a very good street now, paved, and it feels very good, but I don't think it can handle the kind of vehicle traffic that I shouldn't say that because that's a technical term. I would hate to be driving through here or trying to park here to go to Planet Fitness during the time that this is in session.
But that's like when something's happening at Van Andel, right? Like, no one wants to drive down Ottawa or Fulton when an event's happening there either. I think that's all.
Yes, but Fulton is what, 2-3 lanes? Market is not 2 or 3 lane.
Turn lane in here, right? In this section. Maybe this is a question for the applicant again, but you said for drop-off, you expect it kind of on the east side of the site, like where I'm trying to do this because this is the orientation of it. But if you go back to your like overview with that one, yeah. So is there like a curb cut or like bulb out situation to monitor or to manage the Uber Lyft scenario?
Market is the only place to drop off. I mean, we have an expressway on the north, we have a adjacent city property on the south, and we have a river on the west. So Market is our only drop off. I just noticed Josh moved into position. We have had conversations about potentially, I think somebody said closing Market during an event. We haven't gone to that operationalization of working with GR Mobile to that degree yet, but we did provide, or we are providing drop-off along our only street that's adjacent to the property, and that is Market. Again, the plan and the communication plan that we would enact with the city of Grand Rapids is one of parking in these 18,000 spaces and walking to the event. Now, we know that people are going to drive to the event, right? We know that some people, it's your right in Michigan to park next to the front door. And so we know that some people are going to want to do that. But to mitigate that, we are looking at opportunities. And Josh, I don't know if you want to add to anything, but the operational aspects of that, just haven't been worked out yet. But Market is the area where we have an opportunity to get cars outside the flow of traffic and to drop people off. Now, depending on how that plays out, there could be an opportunity to close or reduce traffic in that area in the future. Redirect traffic coming off of the Market Avenue exit to go straight and not allowing them to turn right is one of those options.
I remember when, back to when the Van Andel Arena was being discussed, and the biggest discussion about it was downtown or out in some cornfield like they put the Palace in Detroit. And parking was, of course, the major issue, because we in West Michigan and other places in Michigan are used to parking the front door, and if we can't get that close, we're going to go by. But the beauty of putting it here, and I've been to the Palace and it's closed now, is getting out of the Palace takes an hour or two. Because there's nowhere to go. You have one parking lot, one expressway entrance. In downtown, the beauty of it is you've got, and it's stimulated all the growth of restaurants and other things to do before and after, which then disperse the need to get out of downtown quickly. That said, I think this is an incredible possibility and asset for our town. And I have, like people did with the Van Andel, parking, because I live downtown and they're going to, be driving around looking all over the place for a parking place. But I'd rather see that kind of environment downtown than when I remember 40 years ago when, as Mayor Logie would say, you could roll a bowling ball down Monroe Avenue and nobody'd know the difference at 5 o'clock at night because it was empty. So overall, it's a very complex project, and I appreciate the work that's gone into it. I feel that there are questions, but sometimes we just have to take that step and hope we've dotted enough I's and crossed enough T's that we can come back and and manage this. I mean, when you go to the Van Andel now, there are cops everywhere for helping traffic, and I'm sure those kind of plans will have to be put in place. I think I can live with what the plan is now because it brings a great asset, and I saw with the Van Andel how the concerns that people had were really created much more than I ever expected would be downtown.
Just for me to be clear, I was expressed concern about dropping off and picking up, not parking.
I have your same concern.
Okay. And I would also note that in the Jane Jacobs language, this is a edge, and it's hard to make a river a seam. And that is different, where even the arena has 4 sides, and you can go in 4 directions. Here, you can go in 2, maybe 3, right? Which I'm intrigued by the idea of connecting across the river, which could really help that, of course.
Yeah.
Josh, do you have anything to add?
Hi, everybody. Josh Nober with Mobile GR. So specifically as it relates to pickup drop-off, because that's been a large portion of that, you'll notice in there's a lot of the administrative that you would be approving. So we have really gotten in a good track record of working with developments, and Van Andel Arena is probably the prime example. Uber, Lyft didn't exist when the arena was built. So everybody was dropping off. Fulton Street, there is no designated pickup drop-off zone at Van Andel Arena currently today. There is not, well, there is just after the development, and it was not part of the land use development with 20 Monroe Live. They did not exist. So we've done those as operational considerations afterwards when you start figuring out how they operate, what we're trying to do. The landscape of that has changed dramatically. This is a little bit different and it's constrained, with the river. That's the beauty of it in a lot of ways. But I think part of that is looking at the configuration of all of the street network that is adjacent to this and how people would exit off of the Market 131 and then traverse on Cherry Street. Then you have Williams that heads back in a different direction. You also have Bartlett, which will be a new improved intersection that will be able to access the site. There will be a signalized intersection, which will allow you to go in both directions onto Market Street. So a lot of this is developing an operational traffic management and special events management plan for any development, which is what we do. We do that not only for these types of fixed venues, we do that for every special event that's programmed. Pride Festival had 30,000 people down here, and we were able to mitigate those impacts for how we do that. But that is an operational challenge versus what the fixed location is going to be doing. So when it comes to pickup drop-off, I think I just want to be very mindful that that is part of why we as a city did not require a traffic impact study, because this is going to be non-peak trips that are going to be dispersed all across the entirety of the city because it doesn't have on-site parking, it doesn't have a residential component. But we need to put that flag in there for the applicant as we have those additional conversations with MDOT, because they are probably not going to be too keen on having a drop-off location right near the interchange for a whole variety of reasons, to not have spillover, backup effects. But it really is just as part of the special land use application is denoting that they do need to designate a specific pickup drop-off locations, and how are we going to operate that? And that's more on the traffic management side after the development is approved and is constructed and operates.
And that signalized intersection at Bartlett will have a crosswalk that will be improved, whereas today it's...
Yes, and we already have put in the new improved crossing at Williams. It does not have in the flashing beacon, which is already proposed to be installed. We just haven't put it in because we don't know what building is going on the other side, and so we wanted to wait. All of the underground utilities are already installed, so the infrastructure can be placed as soon as the development comes online. So I just wanted to answer that about the pickup drop-off, just to give you the history. They were never considered for some of these previous developments. The only exception was they were built into the DeVos Place. But that's a very different type of use, and that, a lot more of the pickup drop-off all courses of day during regular business hours, Monday through Friday and on weekends.
And we had a lot of conversations when we were working on the redesign of Market. And we made a very intentional decision to prioritize pedestrians. And so you'll note that the scale of the street has changed dramatically. It is one lane in each direction with a center turn lane, improved pedestrian crossings. And we did that because we knew we wanted to facilitate a good mixed-use development, whether it's an amphitheater, mixed-use development, or both. We wanted to make sure that we had that pedestrian connectivity. So we did prioritize that over making sure vehicles can maneuver easily through Market, and that those are just, in general, good urban design practices that we were following.
And the one last thing is, although it's not like Van Andel that it has streets for cars on all four sides, it has pedestrian access points on all sides of the venue. So you can access it all along the river, which means you can drive to a whole variety of places and still access it as a pedestrian. It's just we're trying to think about these venues differently. So this is going to be much more of a pedestrian-focused entity than a car, and I think that's to the benefit of all the other businesses that are on the other side of the location because there's more people to patronize that, so.
Commissioners, other thoughts, discussion?
Mr. Chair, you somewhat obligated yourself to
I
No,
actually did not.
that was me,
I did
so we're good for right now. We're going to have a discussion here. Thank you.
very dicey legal situation.
This is how public meetings operate.
All right.
So I wanted to just mention that I have the same concerns, but I also think that because it's new, like it is kind of what Susan sort of pointed out, which is kind of like a wait and see, unfortunately. Like we don't exactly know the intent of people traversing to the not even yet built location. So I do think people tend to figure these things out. And if you know this in advance, which, you know, a website will handle, I'm sure, what the ideal method to get there and how to operationalize it properly and use the river walk, and that would be great if that bridge were built, but we'll talk about that later. I think that, you know, this is a space that is underutilized. I mean, I'm going to back Susan here. We were talking about this earlier a little bit about just like curiosity and what can be built in a space of this nature. And I think it is, you know, purposeful. I think that the availability for public comment has been, you know, exhausted. I mean, just having the meeting, thank you, Kara, for that, and your group in June, I thought was important. And seeing the results in our packet was empowering, and I think people are generally supportive. I am kind of, I sort of am shocked that there weren't more people here for public comment, but I do think that that speaks to your outreach efforts potentially already, that, you know, they've had an opportunity for that to be seen and to be heard. So thanks for taking those into consideration. Additionally, I think that, you know, we're a big city. We got to stop pretending that we're not. And these are the sort of improvements that make it a destination as well for people that may not even live here. So I'm supportive of this project. I think that nobody wouldn't want it to be successful, and so you'll be willing to take those opportunities for improvement, I'm hoping, as the developer and the you know, and the nonprofit that's associated with it. So thank you for being so deliberate in nature, and I appreciate everybody that has shown up today to talk about it.
I'm also in strong support of this. I appreciate the work you guys have done with the safety concerns of cars driving by on the highway. And then it also appears with the diversity in the focus groups as well, and trying to get as many people's opinions. And to Susan's point as well, I'm happy to see, like with the Palace there, seeing how far out of the downtown area it was. Happy to see us going in a downtown area and trying to bring more people. And as far as, you know, how people are going to get there or not, I personally don't like going to big sporting events and concerts just because I don't like the crowds and maybe some of the, I guess, just having to deal with the parking and walking. And that's, I don't go to many of those things, but for people that are interested in that stuff, they are willing and, you know, wanting to do that stuff and accepting of that situation there. So I think those types of things will sort itself out. So for those reasons, I'm in strong support of this project.
Yeah, I agree with what all the other commissioners have said. One thing we haven't talked about is the alcohol use. And so just for our discussion, I think it's completely appropriate in this location, in this venue, even with when events aren't happening as part of the food and drink building and when they have that open up for dining. They have an alcohol management plan, which we had in our packet. And so, yeah, I'm not at all worried about that either. And yeah, just to reiterate, people will figure out parking and walking, and we have great staff and city departments to work on special events and make that happen. And I mean, this development is completely different than the case we approved nearby on South Division, the TOD one. But like similar to that, like we have to try these things to see if the systems, the infrastructure we put in place work and how we can change kind of our activities and behaviors in the city and culture. And I think this is an awesome opportunity.
Yeah, I will echo all of the comments. I think this is a really good use. I like the location because it is downtown. People get to stay, patronize the businesses down there. Founders will be jumping right after every concert. So yeah, no, I do think it's a really good use. And I am interested in just seeing what we eventually do with traffic, because I appreciate all of the comments, and that did alleviate a lot of my concerns regarding traffic. But I do think it will still be somewhat of an issue going through there, being that it's one lane. But as what was already said, people will figure out how to get to and from there without having to drive up there. So overall, I'm in favor of this.
I'm happy to make a motion, unless other people have, unless, Adrian, you were ready to do it? No, I wasn't. Okay. Thank you. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
First, I just want to say I think this is a really important piece of the vibrancy puzzle for a city like Grand Rapids. I'm really excited to see this. I understand the concerns about congestion and parking, although parking's not necessarily one of our considerations in this area. I think the impact of this number of visitors is, and so, but I do think, you know, while the location presents some challenges because of the proximity to an off-ramp, I think it's also the perfect space for this, you know, on the river, along a green space, next to the highway. There's a lot of reasons that this makes perfect sense for our city, and so I'm really excited about it. I think, Lucas, if you want to say 15 words, I'll allow for that. That's how many words Hal had, so if you can limit your comments to that, I'll give you that.
Just be aware who the real boss is when you're talking about decibels and everything else. Nothing you can do is going to change this boss.
Thanks. All right. Anything else, commissioners? Otherwise, I'm open to hearing a motion.
Sure. I'll make that motion. I did want to add kind of an additional point that I'm super excited about the public access easement to the river and just completing that, so we have open access to that asset as well, and as we build out that trail system. So, all right. Now therefore be it resolved that the Planning Commission approves the special land use request of Grand Action Foundation 2.0 Kara Wood for approval of a plus or minus 12,000 seat outdoor amphitheater with alcohol service and a street-side plaza with mobile food vending and outdoor activities at 201, 225, 233, and 301 Market Avenue Southwest for the following reasons. The proposed use will be consistent with the purpose and intent of the master plan and zoning ordinance, including the zone district, because the proposed use will help actualize several of the goals of the GR Forward Downtown and River Action Plan, including Goal 1.4, enhance neighborhood access to the river, Goal 5.1, expand arts and cultural events and temporary program to further activate the public realm year-round. It is the type of major cultural institution that is appropriate for the City Center Zone District and will support the purpose and intent of the City Center Zone District as an interesting and fun place to eat, socialize, and listen to music that the downtown intends to attract. The proposed use will meet the site plan review standards because this site is a redevelopment of an existing site and as such will be brought into conformance with all site improvement provisions as required per the ordinance. The site has been arranged to provide both pedestrian access and emergency access to the river's edge. Site lighting will be installed per the city ordinance and will not impede the vision of drivers on public streets, including US 131. The proposed use will be compatible, harmonious, and appropriate with the existing or planned character and uses of the neighborhood, adjacent properties, and the natural environment because the linkages in the Riverwalk to be provided by this development will support the pedestrian-oriented environment desired downtown. The project will redevelop a current industrial site for use more appropriate for the city center zone district, and the amphitheater will draw development south of Fulton into the southwest quadrant of the city. Potentially adverse effects arising from the proposed use on the neighborhood and adjacent properties will be minimized through the placement of building structures and entrances, as well as the location of screening, fencing, landscaping, buffers, and setbacks, and proximity to transit and considerable parking infrastructure within a 15-minute walk. The proposed use will not be detrimental, hazardous, or disturbing to existing or future uses or to the public welfare by reason of excessive traffic, noise, smoke, odors, glare, or visual clutter, because pursuant to the submitted noise study, the existing freeway will act as a noise buffer for areas north of the project, and the bulk of the noise generated by the venue will be directed upwards by the lawn, seating berm, and dissipate over the river. Most attendees to the event will not be arriving to the venue in personal vehicles, and lighting will be directed away from nearby residential and commercial uses. The proposed use will not adversely affect the walkability of the neighborhood, impair pedestrian circulation patterns, disrupt the continuity of the urban street wall, or otherwise hinder the creation of a pedestrian-oriented environment because the existing site is largely unwalkable and provides no public access to the river's edge. The proposed site will transform the space between the public right-of-way on Market Ave and the river's edge and provide multiple enhanced access points to the river. And this project will greatly increase walkability in the neighborhood and provide for a far more pedestrian-oriented environment. The building and site area required for the proposed use will retain as many natural features of the landscape as practicable because the existing site is largely impervious and the proposed design will significantly increase both the green space and tree canopy. Adequate public or private infrastructure and services already exist or would be provided at no additional cost because the existing water main and Market Avenue is undersized from a fire protection standpoint for the project this size. As such, it is anticipated that the existing water main will be upsized at the developer's cost. This will benefit both this project and future development on these riverfront parcels, and other public facilities available to the site are largely sufficient for the proposed project. The proposed use will not be detrimental to the financial stability or economic welfare of the city because this project will create significant economic opportunities for the city and surrounding neighborhoods by attracting large-scale events and performances. It will stimulate local businesses, restaurants, hotels, and shops. Given the character, location, development trends, and other aspect of the neighborhood, I hate this condition. Or finding. Okay. It is demonstrated that the proposed location for alcohol sales will demonstrably be an asset to the neighborhood because the downtown amphitheater is a unique use for Grand Rapids and West Michigan as a whole, and alcohol service is intended as an amenity for patrons of the performance venue and outdoor plaza. The sale and consumption of alcohol on the premises will promote economic growth in a manner consistent with the adopted goals, plans, and policies of the area because the amphitheater is a catalytic project that is projected to bring $7 million in annual wage earnings and $490 million in net new economic impact over the next 30 years. And the amphitheater will bring vitality to an underutilized portion of the city's downtown, expanding activity and commerce along Market Avenue and enhancing quality of life for residents and visitors. The use or change in use as constructed and operated by the applicant is compatible with the neighborhood because although alcohol will be available for purchase at the venue, the main attraction will be the music and entertainment, and well-managed venues that serve alcohol are appropriate in a downtown setting. Adjacent or nearby parks, religious institutions, and schools will not be adversely affected by the proposed use because other than a dog park located across from the venue, no other parks, playgrounds, religious institutions, or schools are in immediate vicinity. The use as proposed to be operated by the applicant will not have any or minimal negative secondary effects on the neighborhood because events will generally end by 11 p.m. and the operator will employ the same security contractor currently utilized at Van Andel Arena and DeVos Place. Be it further resolved that the following conditions of approval shall apply. Standards Standard conditions at A, approvals, which have mostly been read, but I'll read condition number 5, which is that any expansion of the approved special land use requires an additional special land use review and approval by the Planning Commission. At 7:30 back. Okay. 2, that the building plans are approved in concept and are subject to final site plan review. 3, that subject to the amended noise control ordinance, events shall typically occur between 9 a.m. and 11 p.m., subject to weather and schedule delays, with the venue cleared of guests by midnight, and event breakdown shall conclude by approximately 2 a.m., with all vehicles having left the facility by approximately 4 a.m. That mobile food vending on the outdoor plaza shall not include outdoor cooking due to the proximity of the street. 5, that the following shall be required prior to the issuance of a LUDS permit. The applicant shall work with the police department to ensure that all operational issues are addressed. A trip generation analysis shall be submitted to Mobile GR. The property shall be divided as proposed. The portions of Bartlett and William Street within the development site shall be vacated unless an encroachment agreement has been obtained. And did you have something?
That the applicant continues to work with the city to evaluate potential sound noise resulting from the use and implement any necessary mitigation measures through final site and architectural design to the extent necessary.
Great, I will add that.
Support. Can I add or ask if you would consider on 3C of changing the language, most attendees to events will not be arriving in personal vehicles. I think it might be more appropriate to say most attendees to the site.
So I did amend that to say most attendees to the events will not be arriving to the venue in personal.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't pick that up. That works as well.
All right, any other discussion?
I think I just have a question. I don't know if is this good to ask a question on number 4, that mobile food vending on the outdoor plaza should not include outdoor cooking due to the proximity of, is that an ordinance or?
So yes, outdoor cooking itself would be a special land use. So typically what we find is when there's outdoor cooking, there's smoke, and thus there's different impacts to surrounding uses. And so since it wasn't asked for and it is an additional consideration by the Planning Commission, we made that clear that food trucks are generally like mostly warming. They're not grilling with excessive smoke happening.
Got you. Okay.
All right, any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. Thank you. Let's take a 5-minute break before our last case. All right, let's get going on our last case. Sign program, yes. 2135 East Beltline Ave Northeast. We have a planned sign program amendment. Take it away, Sarah.
All right, thanks, Chairman. Our last request of the day is related to 2135 East Beltline, and this is a site that most of you are probably familiar with. This is near Knapp's Corner, specifically where an old Chili's used to be. And if you remember back in May, we reviewed signage for one of the two new buildings that is being built in this location. Looking at the original plan sign program of the development, the subject site is within this blue and red box here. And what you'll notice from the original PSP is that no signage was designated in this area. And so the text language of the PSP designated signage signage follow the requirements of Knapp's Corner. And that required all tenants to have 25 square feet of wall signage in the front and 25 square feet of wall signage in the back. What's unique about this case, and the PowerPoint is decided not to work right now, but if you'll remember from that first approval, you all had decided to do several wall signs on the urgent care building, but we chose to forego the ground signage and a south elevation wall sign that we deemed to be unnecessary or inappropriate for the development. Give me 1 second, please. All right, thanks. Sorry about that. Let's get through amphitheater stuff. So like I was saying, to bring focus back, you had already looked at the signage for the urgent care. Now for this development, you're going to be taking into consideration signage for a Starbucks coffee shop, as well as a future tenant space located just north of the Starbucks location. And what they're presenting for you today would be wall signage on the south elevation. This would face the internal drive of the Celebration development. And then they're also proposing signage on the north side, as well as a small projecting sign just above one of the customer entrances. Uniquely, they are also proposing 4 mobile order pickup signs, and these are proposed to be attached to the support beams of the canopy. And in terms of the canopy and the actual buildings themselves, those have already gone through the approval process with the planning department. And so I'd like you just to consider, why these were chosen to be placed on those beams, also the ground clearance of the beams, of the signs, that are relatively low, considering we typically require an 8-foot ground clearance over right-of-ways, 14-foot ground clearance over vehicular areas. So I suggest some exploration of that. In terms of the appropriateness of the sign package, it is in line, generally speaking, with the planned sign program. The only exception there would be they are proposing that small projecting sign and then the 4 smaller mobile order pickup signs. Obviously, at the inception of the planned sign program, mobile order pickups weren't established. So I'd like you to also consider just the changing times and the way that we interact with these retail stores. Moving on to the future tenant space, unfortunately, we weren't able to be provided a sign package for that building. And so planning staff has chosen to recommend what's in line with the planned sign program, which again kicks you back to the Knapp's Corner plan, which allowed 25 square feet at the front and rear of a building. If you wanted to be open to something a little bit different, I did also provide the appropriate sizes within the East Beltline Overlay District. So there is some room there to kind of explore different sizes, but ultimately I'd like you to discuss that with the applicant to see if they have an idea of, not only which signage they would need, but also what kind of tenants they're looking to have in that space. That concludes my presentation, and this final image just gives you an idea of the overall signage for this these new outlots and their buildings. I'll pass it back to you, Chairman, if anyone has any questions.
Any questions for staff at this time? All right, thank you. I'll invite the applicant up if there's any additional information you'd like to share with us.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you, Sarah, for the presentation. Thank you also for consideration of this item.
Could you lift up your microphone a little bit? A little taller than Sarah.
Better?
Yeah, thank you.
So I don't know if I have too much necessarily add to Sarah's presentation. I would just like to speak to the importance on the Starbucks side, now that the veil is uncovered, that they're pretty specific on their signage. It's a pretty standard sign for them across the board. I'm sure you've seen them sprinkled throughout the city of Grand Rapids. And it's just something that it increases their brand presence, even though we know who they are and what they do. It's just something that follows them around. And we've taken into consideration to limiting the amount of signage that is on site. On the east elevation and the southern elevation is where most of the sign is limited to. And they also made a great attempt to keep it within the confinements and constraints of the overlay district. And overall, we just feel that the signage on the Starbucks building will add to the overall look of the development and increase and beautify the streetscape. And speaking to the additional tenant space, as Sarah mentioned, we weren't able to put together like a signage package for that space. We don't have a tenant in line at the moment. And just kind of based off of where we landed for the urgent care building, we do think it would make sense just to sign the east and the western facades of the building. Obviously, once something is locked into place there, we'll be sure that they're aware of what's asked of the city and make sure that they also align with the allotted signage square footage.
All right, thank you. Commissioners, any questions?
Yeah. So in regard to sign C, the projecting sign, typically they're required to be at least 8 foot, and this is less than 7 feet above the sidewalk. Can you explain the rationale for that?
So I think they just didn't want to go too high up on the building just based off of where the brick sits and how the building is constructed is where they landed there. We can take it back and take another look at raising the sign if it were to be a condition. But that's just where I believe they landed in regards to the construction and the constructability of the building.
And then I'm also curious about the necessity of that sign, since there's already the big main entrance sign there. Why is this projecting sign necessary?
So the projecting of the sign, if you drive on the western side of the development, this is where that sign would somewhat peek off of the building and give you another view of obviously the siren signage that.
I see.
Yep, Laurel. So when drivers are on the west side of the building, they'll be able to see it. But if you're on the belt line or if you're coming into the drive, there's a not a knee wall, but like a decorative wall that's around the patio. So in a way, it's hard to see where the actual customer entrance is, albeit, of course, you can still see the logo from the street.
Okay. And then going down or going to the mobile order signs, can you both talk about the reason that they need to exceed the maximum sign height, and then why do they have to be illuminated? Light. Why do they have to be lit?
Oh, illuminated. Oh, I was gonna say, is that where we
lit up?
So overall, the mobile order sign is obviously just to denote where to pull up, just to enhance the circulation and the flow of the site. I would say that the illumination of the sign is more for when obviously it's darker outside, even though I don't believe that their operating hours fall too far into the evening, but just to make it clear where where patrons should be going to and where they should be setting up and waiting for their coffee or their food.
I get the rationale of having mobile order spots and those designations. I think that makes sense for the operations, but like in terms of why aren't they just on a pole in front of the space so they could be considered like incidental to other signage?
And you're meaning in front of like a parking sign in front?
Well, right now, they're affixed to the canopy, and they're also higher than what's the maximum allowed, right? Am I wrong?
The bottom is closer to the sidewalk, is what Sarah mentioned. Typically, you'd need a greater clearance. I guess my scowl at you there was, you would really prefer something on a post versus something that's like built into the architecture? Because I think this is a better solution than just a metal.
I see. I was misunderstanding the issue, I guess, how it didn't conform to the ordinance.
Another thing too.
That's my bad.
And the other thing too, and I think I might need Kristen's help with this, but the ground clearance requirement is typically over public right-of-ways. This is unique in that it's internal to the development. It's really a sidewalk that's just to facilitate pedestrians going from their car to the front door, right? So in a way, it's not necessarily not meeting code, but it's also just something that I wanted you guys to think about and determine if you'd rather see a post with a sign.
Gotcha.
Any other questions for the applicant? Yeah,
Greg McDade.
thanks, Greg. All right. If there's no other questions, we can discuss. Nope. Nope. No, not for a site plan.
I'm glad you asked about those mobile pickup ones, because I was confused about that aspect of it as well. So you can scowl at me if you want, but.
No, I wasn't
Thank you.
scowling about her asking. I was scowling because she was suggesting that
Well,
we
I
put them on
wasn't
posts
necessarily
into the sidewalk.
I was not necessarily suggesting that. I just was curious about why why they were designed so that they couldn't just be incidental. That was the question, because they could be if they were smaller or whatever, right? Like
They would be incidental if they were not illuminated.
Okay.
Because they're illuminated, it tosses it into needing a sign permit.
Okay.
And obviously, the plan sign program did not address illuminated mobile order pickup signs.
Why not?
Weird.
Yeah.
I mean, I think an internally illuminated sign looks nice. The quality of the sign matters in this case. I'm okay with it. And I think it's better than if it's on a steel post.
I think that's fine too. Yeah, that's fine. I just wanted the clarification.
5 million Starbucks.
Other discussion, I guess just on the point of the projecting sign, the blade sign on the front, I think a lot of zone districts allow for a wall sign and a blade sign in combination on the same elevation, so I don't think that's beyond the normal scope.
Yeah, usually the blade signs are to denote where the customer entrance is, and so that's why we allow for both.
Going to the tenant space that we don't have specific requests for, I agree that I think it's appropriate to do the east and west side. Similar to what's consistent with the square footage we've allowed for the urgent care, and maybe not as big as that, because this building is this tenant space is significantly smaller, but I'm comfortable with east and west. I don't think north is necessary because it's like that internal alleyway. I think that we got rid of the one on the south of the urgent care for the same reason, so. There, I said something positive about signs.
Just to help you guys out, I was going to mention the square footage that you approved for the urgent care. 2 of the wall signs were 68 square feet, and a third was 36 square feet.
I think based on the size of this tenant space and what we're considering for the Starbucks, that it potentially makes sense to keep with that 25 to 35 square feet.
I agree.
Back to the blade sign, I think I'm not opposed to it in general, but I do think at 6'8" and it sticks out 2 feet from the wall as a somewhat tall person, it makes me a little uncomfortable. And I think there's a reason for our 8-foot rule.
Yeah, there absolutely is. It's an accessibility concern that regardless, in this case, whether it's public or private property, we want to make sure that there's clear access underneath the sign for those that are a little bit taller.
So, yeah, if it can't be at the required 8 foot because of the architecture, I think it should at least be higher than 6'8".
And we can definitely take that back and take a look at it, raising the sign. Just don't want that to be something that hangs this up and would be cause for denial on that specific signage.
The sign is also 5 feet tall, so I think that there's some design considerations and choices that could be made to increase the height, the clearance height.
That blade sign would actually be 2 feet.
It's not, oh, I'm sorry, 2 feet? Oh, I apologize. I was looking at the wrong,
The one on the eastern elevation is actually
I'm sorry.
5 foot tall.
my apologies.
I think as long as they're willing to take a look at it and work with staff, I'm fine with it. All right, any other discussion or questions? Is anyone willing to make a motion? Okay.
I can do it. Now therefore it be resolved that the Planning Commission approves the request of Grand Rapids Retail Management 2 LLC. Gabe Schumann is seeking an amendment to the plan sign program of Celebration Village for a new urgent care building to be located at 2135 East Beltline Avenue Northeast for the following reasons. The applicant has demonstrated that the proposed plan sign program amendments would result in a more attractive aesthetic setting, improve safety, provide more convenient identification for planned users or other similar purposes because the proposed amendments will allow signage typically permitted by the underlying East Beltline Overlay District, allow for adequate and effective signs for identification and appropriate commercial speech. The applicant has demonstrated that the proposed plan substantially furthers the purposes and intent of Section 5.15.01 because the proposed amendments would protect the need to promote new businesses within the Celebration Village development. The applicant has demonstrated that the approval of the plan sign will ensure that signs are located, designed, constructed. Sorry, do I need to go back to finish off that 4? Sorry, just because number 4.
Yeah, if you want to maybe restart number 4.
Okay. The applicant has demonstrated that the approval of the plan sign program amendments would not create any adverse impacts on one or more properties in the vicinity because the proposed amendments will ensure that signs are located, designed, constructed, installed, and maintained in a way that protects life, health, property, and the public welfare. Reinforce and support the character of the surrounding development by taking into account building scale and massing and nearby travel speeds. Balance the need and right to communicate with needs to promote orderly communication, promote community aesthetics, and prevent a proliferation of signs and sign structures that can be confusing and distracting. Be it further resolved that the following conditions of approval shall apply to this project. Standard condition set A approvals as shown on the screen, striking 3, 4, 5, and 7. And
Support.
All right, we have motion and support. Any discussion?
Can I just
Commissioner Shannon?
want to clarify in the resolution, I apologize, we have a typo, labeled this as a urgent care building. This is a commercial tenant building, so we can just update the minutes accordingly. And then also, I think it would be helpful if there was a condition of the approval that specified what was decided for that north tenant bay. If I heard correctly, that the north tenant bay sign would be controlled by the existing plan sign program, limiting wall signs to no more than 2 signs of 25 square foot each.
It's fine.
I don't know that it's necessary to specify a facade, but that's up to the Planning Commission.
no.
What do you mean, like what side of the buildings are allowed?
Yes, because you had made mention about not sure if you liked it on the north or thought it was appropriate to be on the north.
Right. I
Because
think
of-
just east and west.
East and west? Got it. So then you would want to specify that 2 25-square-foot signs be permitted on the east and west elevations.
Say that. Also, this is based on 2 25-foot signs on the east and west elevations of the building
For the north tenant.
for the north tenant. Thanks.
Support.
Do we need to say anything about the blade sign height as a condition, or do we
Oh, yeah.
trust that it will?
Yeah, if you, that the blade sign should be elevated to the greatest extent possible to provide maximum clearance under the pedestrian walkway.
Is that language okay?
You can just say, you can add that if you want. You don't have to
Okay,
repeat it if you don't want to.
Add that, thank you.
That's what I was doing. It's like what she said. Yeah.
Ditto.
All right, any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. Thank you. I'll open up the public comment portion of the meeting and close public comment. Commissioners, staff, anything else for today? Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you.